to our seminar today on ethical business, which we're having here at St Andrews by the Wardrobe, organised by London Church's Social Action. London Church's Social Action seeks to resource church leaders around issues of social justice within the whole of the London area. We're an ecumenical organisation. We serve the senior church leaders of the denominations. They meet together a couple of times a year, and in between we try to resource church leaders who are working largely on a borough level or are working across London on particular issues. And we also then agitate a bit the senior leaders around the kind of messages that we generate together. So the process of today is a learning process. That's why we call it a seminar. Trying to learn from one another on a topic of ethical business. And so some of you I know have a lot of thoughts about that. We're looking forward to hearing them. Others of us might not know much about it at all, and that's why hopefully we can all be learning from one another. And we use a model of theological reflection. So we're going to open up the topic, and we're looking forward to some input from Tim Thorpe and Anna Jones at first, and any other work represented in the room. Open up the topic and understand what experiences we had in the room of ethical business. And then Paul is going to lead us in a bit of Bible work, and then we can have some reflection in groups, an opportunity then to think together and to generate some thoughts together. Before then, Mike will lead us in some prayer and silence. We feel that our processes of theological reflection, we want them to be guided by what the Spirit is saying to the churches. And so we're going to take some time for prayer and silence. And then we'll try to then identify some of the key points that have come out of our learning together this morning. And then we'll be able to share those with each other and with the wider network. And then we're going to have a little bit of input from my grade group about what they do as an example of an ethical business before enjoying their lunch.
We are an independent charity. We are ecumenical, so we work with churches of all shapes and sizes. I'm speaking to you this morning because I'm a director of Clean for Good, and that's really what I wanted to talk to you about very briefly this morning. Clean for Good is a business with a social purpose. It's a contract cleaning company, but it's a contract cleaning company with a difference. It's been running for about a year now, and what makes it different is that we are trying to do cleaning in London in the business sector differently. So we are a living wage employer. We are one of, I think you can still count the living wage cleaning companies in London on the fingers of one hand. They're generally very small. We are one of those. But we do more than that. We sometimes call ourselves living wage plus. So the plus is that we also commit to training, managing and developing our cleaners as well as paying them. And when we did some of our initial feasibility research, the living wage was actually not top of the list of what cleaners in London wanted. What they wanted was a guaranteed income. They wanted guaranteed hours. So we also don't offer 0 hours contracts. Our cleaners start the week knowing how many hours of cleaning they're going to be doing this week. So in a nutshell, we're trying to run a cleaning company which cleans stuff and which just provides decent, fairly paid jobs for cleaners. I think 40 years ago that would have been probably a fairly standard cleaning company, but today it's extremely unusual. We don't think there's another company in Britain which does quite the same thing that we're trying to do to the cleaners who are working for us. We have two aims. One is to survive as a business, to break even, and to deliver good quality services to our customers, and also obviously to offer a good work experience to our cleaners. But our second aim is a more strategic aim, which is that we really want to disrupt the cleaning sector. So we see ourselves as a demonstration cleaning company. If we can break even and prove that being nice to cleaners is not incompatible with cleaning offices, then maybe we've got a successful business model, and we would like to be able to take that to the rest of the cleaning sector at some point in the next year or two and say, well, if we can do it, why can't you? So our challenge actually is to transform the cleaning sector in London. We can talk a little bit later maybe about some of the issues which crop up in the cleaning sector, but I'm sure you've seen stories in the media. There are some horror stories about how people are treated and how they are paid. So that's Clean for Good, that's who we are and that's what we do. As Stephen rightly said, Clean for Good began here in this beautiful church not the current vicar, but the previous vicar, Guy, and one of his team, Miriam, and actually one of our CTC's interns were working here. They had the crazy idea. They were trying to work out what to do in a city parish. And they did some listening, they did some research, they wandered around the parish, and one of the things they noticed is that every morning when tens of thousands of very well-paid office workers came to work, there were thousands of very badly paid cleaners going home, and they asked the question, what can we do for the cleaners? Or this being a church, the question was, what does good news look like for cleaners in the City of London? And their slightly bonkers answer was a cleaning company. That's not a normal answer you get from a church. You might expect churches to set up charities, but actually they said, why don't we set up a business which actually provides decent jobs for these guys? And they had all sorts of horror stories about how these cleaners were treated. I will cut the story short, but through it's taken a couple of years of development, but Guy and Miriam managed to get some money. CTC developed a business plan. I wrote the first business plan for Clean for Good, and I won't give you the full saga, but last February we launched Clean for Good as a fully formed business, and we had a few months of setup, and the business has been operating in the marketplace since last June. And I can tell you that now currently we have 33 customers, 33 contracts, so we are cleaning churches, but we are also cleaning community centres and offices, cafes, so real places. They are not just friends and family. There's one or two friends and family in there who've been nice to us, which is always great, but actually there's a whole bunch of real people in there as well who don't know us and who have found us on Google or read about us in The Guardian or just seen an advert somewhere. We have a team of 14 cleaners. Last month our team did nearly 1,000 hours of cleaning across central and inner London, and our current turnover is something like £250,000. So we're still a long way from break even. Margins in the cleaning sector are pretty slim, but we are aspiring to make that work. We're hoping to break even later this autumn. And obviously one of the things you will know from what I've just said, if you've done your maths, you will probably know that we're one of the most expensive cleaning companies in London because we pay the living wage and because we don't ask our managers to manage 70 contracts, which is what the rest of the private sector is asking their managers to do. So it costs more to manage and costs more to pay our cleaners. So we are also making progress in the marketplace, even though our prices are often 25-30% higher than most of our competitors. And I'm delighted to say that's because we are finding customers in the marketplace who do care about cleaners, which is fabulous. So it's very much the fair trade story. I'm sure you are, I'm older than I look. I remember the fair trade story developing and growing, and there are a whole range of reasons why that has succeeded, but it's not just because the coffee tastes nice. It's because people bought the coffee, even though it was more expensive, because they wanted to know that the coffee had that the supply chain had some integrity. They wanted to know that the farmers growing the coffee had actually been paid properly, a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. Well, Clean for Good is fair trade for the UK. When your office is cleaned and your bin is emptied, you know that the cleaner has been fairly paid and fairly treated. It's exactly the same principle, but for UK workers. I'm going to finish with my inevitable 3 bullet points, the sort of so what question. Just 3 points I wanted to make. First of all, Clean for Good is a real kicking business. We have shareholders. There are 3 churches and charities, 3 Christian charities own the controlling stake, but it's funded through investors buying shares, so there's no safety net. If we go bust, we go bust and everybody loses their money. But we are a business, and that is because the problem we are trying to tackle in the cleaning sector is not about charity. This is not about being kind to cleaners. This is, for us, very much a question of justice. A fair day's pay for a fair day's work is a question of justice, not charity, and therefore we have set up a business to address that. The supply chain is broken in the cleaning sector. Something has happened. There's been a race to the bottom on prices. Customers are just buying cleaning on the basis of who can do it for the cheapest price, and they've lost sight of the cleaner. The real culprits in that, you can blame the cleaning sector, you can blame the cleaning companies. Actually, the real culprits are the customers who are only interested in ever smaller prices without bothering to ask the question as to what's happened to the supply chain and what's happened to the cleaners. And in fact, the only way that these very small prices are possible is because the cleaners themselves are being shortchanged. In fact, the managers are being shortchanged as well. No one is happy inside these cleaning companies, including, I have to say, often the investors, because the margins are so small. So the whole marketplace really isn't working terribly well. And the way to fix that is to fix the supply chain and to reconnect the cleaner, who has a name and a face and a story, reconnect the cleaner with the customer. And if you knew who was emptying your bin and you knew who they were, I don't think you'd be happy to pay them less than the minimum wage. That's our bet. And as we've gone into the marketplace, I think that bet is coming true. There are a lot of decent people who actually do want to ensure that their cleaners are paid properly and treated fairly. So the first point is that Clean for Good is business, not charity. It's about justice. The second point is that we've only got to where we are today through teamwork. I'm not a big fan of heroes or Lone Rangers. There is no business entrepreneur with a crazy bow tie in the Clean for Good story. There's no Richard Branson. It's been teamwork. There's been technical experts. There's been people here in the church whose job was to listen to their parish. There's also been investors who have more money than we did to put into the business. And fabulously, there's been customers who have been prepared to pay a bit more to do the right thing. And without any one of those, this business would not be where it is today. So it's been a great team effort. And finally, you would expect this, of course, but we are a business looking for customers. So if you have a church or an office or a shop or a cafe that needs cleaning and you want to know that your cleaners are being well paid and well treated, I have a whole bunch of postcards I can give out later. Please do get in touch. We have a lovely website. All of the contact details are on cleanforgood.co.uk. If you or you know anyone who needs contract cleaning or who just wants a quote, we are very happy to come and give you a quote. If you have a congregation, I'm particularly looking at clergy here, or if you're a member of a church, we are very keen to challenge congregations with the question of who is my cleaner. So when you go to work on a Monday morning, I love cleaning churches, but we want to clean offices as well. When you go to work on a Monday morning, do you know who empties your bins? And do you know the name, and do you know what they get paid? And if the answer is no, please find out. And if you don't like the answer, cleanforgood.co.uk is very happy to provide a quote for the cleaning in your office.
So I'm very millennial and have my notes on my phone. That was really great, Tim. I think we're going to be echoing each other a lot in this, because a lot of the ideas that you were talking about, it's not an issue of charity or thinking about disrupting the sector, something going wrong and being fundamentally broken in the supply chain. A lot of those ideas are things that really resonate with the work in credit unions. So as I was thinking about, well, let me, just to introduce myself initially, I work in the private sector. I work for a consultancy. My job title is managing consultant, so astoundingly vacuous. I basically sit behind a computer all day and tell people what to do. But in my off hours, I'm on the board of London Community Credit Union. I'm assuming some people in here at least are familiar with LCCU. So we cover most of East London, although our core boroughs at this point are Hackney, Tower Hamlets, and Newham. And so that's, we have over 15,000 in membership, and we give out a lot of loans. We have a lot of savings. We'd love to give out more loans, but I'll come on to that. And so I am vice chair of the board of directors. I've been on the board for a couple years now, and hopefully we'll be on it for a couple more. Just by a quick show of hands, how many people would say, yeah, I'm super familiar with credit unions and I know what they do and how they work? Yeah, okay, about half and half. Cool. So I'll get on to that in just a minute. As I was thinking about the topic for today, the idea of ethical business, and I was thinking, at the bottom of it all, in kind of its crudest form or most basic form, we're thinking about how organizations make decisions, and organizations that are influenced by some driver other than bottom line profit, right? That's kind of what we're thinking. We're saying bottom line profit can't be the only driver. So some of it is about how the business organizes itself, right? It has to do with structure. Some of it is about how you define success. Some of it is about external factors. So, how incentivized by the taxman or the regulator or that kind of thing. So how kind of these deep structural things in our economy are set up for incentives. And a lot of it is about consumer demand, right? So responding to consumers and what consumers want. So, demand in many ways defines supply. And I think we've seen, if we kind of think about over the years, there are some of business practices really shaped by overall cultural change, right? So what was once acceptable, say child labor in the West, is no longer acceptable. And what was once unheard of is now the norm. So the practice around crushing male chicks because they are, the chicken industry is separated in terms of the eggs and the meat production. So something like that, you never would have done that, right, back in the day. So there's kind of these big, broad changes that really shape how businesses work. And I think one of the core principles that has really shaped my thinking on it, certainly, is how we think about these changes in terms of relationship. So exactly what Tim was saying in terms of, do you know your cleaner's name and how much he or she is paid. I think the more distance there is in relationships between those making decisions and those affected by decisions, I think the more likely we are to let things slip. The less likely we are to be willing to carry some of the cost on ourselves for that other person's experience. Now, I obviously am not going to try and tackle all the big factors and principles and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm sure many of you could talk far more eloquently than I can about it. But I want to look at specifically the financial services and particularly credit unions. I think our financial services system is very broken. I think we'd all probably agree with that. We know, the Church of England in particular has been doing a huge amount of work on it. I'm not as familiar with all of that as I should be, but there's been a lot that's been going on that particular issue. And I think the idea that our economy is built on debt and our economy is built on interest from loans, right? And interest on that debt, so usury, basically. And the overall system is structured in such a way that is deeply unequal. When I was younger, and kind of going to university and that kind of thing, and I thought, I really want to do good in the world. I was like, well, obviously that means I have to work for a charity, although we called them nonprofits in America, because that's clearly where I'm from. But and so right after university, I joined Amnesty International and worked with them, was on staff with them for about a year in DC. And I found myself just constantly banging my head up against the wall because I felt like while the work is really, really good and important work, but that it was constantly just standing on the outside, trying to push and trying to see something happen. And I think a lot of times the advocacy organizations and that kind of thing and charities, that is the role that they play, and it's a hugely important role. But it doesn't necessarily always change the underlying fabric of how things work. And if we think about that, particularly in the financial services world, and we kind of think about how things work, right? Banks right now, I can put this down, I'm very familiar with this stuff now, but banks right now are built on the idea of low interest borrowers who have a lot of capital that they can put in, right? So all the big banks work on the idea that you will put your savings with them, your current account with them, and that when you need to borrow money, you'll borrow it from them. But because you've probably got a steady job, you're probably fairly stable, you're a very low risk borrower. So they can continue to make money off investing your savings in ways that you have absolutely no idea what they're doing with it, and even your current accounts, because those count as capital anyways. But and then they can lend you money and charge you interest at a very low rate because they're already making money off of the money that you have, and you're super low risk, and they know you're going to pay it back. So the entire banking system right now is built for people like that. And for many people, that is brilliant, because it means if your washing machine breaks or if you need new windows or whatever, as you know, happens to all of us, you can access cheap loans very easily. If you have a stable track record, you have an income, you're considered a low-risk borrower. So it works out really well for most of the population, but not all. Because those who are not stable and those who are higher risk borrowers, those who maybe don't have as steady an income or high an income, those who for whatever reasons their life circumstance and situation is not as stable and steady, they are turned away because they're too risky, they are too unstable, they are too on the margins, or in another way, they're too vulnerable. So they get turned away. And they look for alternatives. And as we all know, right, one of the kind of big alternatives is payday lenders that will charge extortionate interest rates and continue this, driving people further and further into debt. And so credit unions are an alternative to high street banks. I think they're often seen as an alternative to payday lenders, but we are also an alternative to high street banks. And we're an alternative not just for people who are turned away from high street banks, but for everyone. The reason why I'm particularly passionate about credit unions is because I think they offer a sustainable alternative that doesn't rely on grants, that doesn't rely on charity, that is profitable for everyone in the community. And essentially, I think what needs to happen, what we need to see is a shift from having banks that are just about low-risk borrowers and then having credit unions which are just high-risk borrowers right now, because a lot of times it's seen as the poor man's bank. And as a result of having a pool of high-risk borrowers, we do have to charge more for services, because there's a cost, right? There's a cost to banking. There's a cost to have branches, a cost to have staff, a cost to have the IT infrastructure that means when you tap your card on something, it goes from where it, from your account to somewhere else. There's a cost to doing the bank reconciliation and making sure all the money is where it's supposed to be. And many people don't pay that cost right now because of the scale of large banks. And what happens is at credit unions, we have to pay that cost. But because it's only high-risk borrowers who are in our pool, while we can provide far, far, far better rates on loans than payday lenders, we still have to charge for things like current accounts, or we have to charge higher interest than many people could access at a low risk, if you're a low-risk borrower at a bank. So credit unions, for those who aren't familiar with how they work, they're essentially cooperatives. And they are, you become a member, so you have to share the common bond, whatever that is. Sometimes it could be a profession. In our case, it's a place. So if you live, work, or study in Hackney Tower Hamlets or Newham or one of the surrounding boroughs, then you can become a member of the credit union. And when you become a member, your savings become shares. And your savings also become essentially what we hold to then lend out to you. So we're never lending to someone who really isn't in a position to be able to pay it back. And by becoming a member and having those shares, you are essentially an owner of the credit union. And so you can make decisions at the AGM, you can influence how things are done, you can join the board, which is what I did, and become involved. And so when the credit union does well and is profitable, everybody gets a dividend. But we don't pay interest on savings because the idea is that those are your shares, or that's your ownership or stake in the organization. So I won't keep hammering on about credit unions. I'm happy to answer any questions about them. It's something that is particularly near and dear to my heart. I think in kind of to wrap up, I think the credit unions, they offer a sustainable alternative for everyone. And they can be profitable for everyone. And they take into account the true cost of banking services for everyone. And so I would encourage anyone here who needs to replace your windows, or who needs any kind of anything that you might normally put on a credit card or you might take out a loan from your bank, to think about the credit union. The interest will be a little bit higher than some of you may have to pay at a high street bank, but you can be confident that you are part of an organisation that is seeking to serve and be profitable for everyone in the community.
With the community around us, which is very transient in the city, and doing so by dipping into monastic wisdom. And we run a cafe called Host. Our ethos really about the cafe comes from the rule of St. Benedict, and Benedict says in his rule, all guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ, for he himself will say, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. You probably recognise the idea of I was a stranger and you welcomed me from the parable of the sheep and the goats, how we welcome people who are hungry, who are thirsty, who are a stranger, who are in prison. We welcome, and we do so because actually we're welcoming Christ, Christ being the outsider. And it's interesting to think really within the city, how do we welcome people when we're so used to entering into an economic transaction with people? That's, that people are almost commodified in the city. So we make a point if people can come to our cafe without buying anything. They can come, they can sit, they can use the Wi-Fi, they can enjoy the warmth, which is so important at this time of year. They don't have to enter into a transaction. And that's, if you like, is the starting point. We are welcoming without saying you must buy our coffee. So we welcome those who are homeless, we welcome those who are struggling after mental health issues, and we need to welcome the city workers who are going to be buying coffee and buying cakes, etc., so that we can make the whole system work. The city workers are actually invited to, rather like that change please, to bank a cup of coffee, so that anyone who's homeless can come along and claim from the bank their own cup of coffee. Of course, we give cups of coffee to anyone that asks anyway, and we give food to anyone that asks, but it does actually engage the city workers in what we're doing. They have that choice to bank that cup of coffee. One thing I'd like us to reflect upon, and the conversation, I understand I've got sort of 5 minutes, but then you have a conversation in groups. How do we welcome everyone? Because we have issues with people coming in with mental health problems who are often aggressive. We have issues with people coming in who, frankly, smell really bad, and that's quite hard if you're actually trying to sell food and you're hoping that people have a conversation. Just how do we balance that welcoming of everyone without actually losing people that we also want to welcome? You throw your door wide open, completely open, how are you still a safe space for those with their own issues, concerns that are coming into that space? And also, we run in a way that is ethical. So, for example, London Living Wage, we've had to up our game quite quickly because we started running with volunteers. Being a community, we thought we would do our own thing in the cafe and it would all work. We soon realised that that wasn't possible. People are so busy, so we needed to pay. And actually, jumping from volunteers to full London Living Wage is quite a jump. We're almost there. We're about 20p off or something. But the cost has kind of spiraled quite a lot, and how do we cover that is quite a concern. Our suppliers, though, have to be ethical as well. Mission Works Coffee, the direct trade, that was the kind of model that was mentioned earlier. We Are Tea is part of the Ethical Tea Partnership. Dusty Knuckle Bakers are probably the most interesting. They work with young people in East London, and they will go into schools, they will go into youth clubs, they will go into churches, and really engage young people, kind of disaffected young people of East London. And I don't know if you've ever actually, if you bake your own bread, but if you do, it's a great way of getting out the frustration in that dough. And that's what they're doing, and they're finding it really works. And they go from kind of kneading the dough to having a skill, and that's why we buy our coffee from them. Our cakes have come from Women's Refuge in the past. So where the input to business has to reflect the business.
Next, for us that are dipping into the monastic wisdom, St. Benedict's always quite succinct. All guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. For he himself will say, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And that comes from that debate, that parable on the sheep and the goats. And the sheep are surprised to be chosen by Jesus, and they say, why are we chosen? And Jesus says, for I was hungry and you gave me food, I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink, I was a stranger and you welcomed me, I was naked and you gave me clothing, I was sick and you took care of me, I was in prison and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me.
I understand now, looking at the timetable, you chat probably in groups of 3 or 4, just those around you, and then feedback. And I suppose feeding back also from what you've heard from the other speakers. Ethical business is any business that takes account of the supply chain, the workers, the product, and isn't just geared around short-term capital gains, isn't just involved in the transaction, but actually is looking at the well-being in a wider sense, so the environment from which, say, coffee beans come from, or the London living wage for those involved.
An ethical business is one that matches the ethics you have. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be one that you would find moral under some basis, but it is a business in which you use the ethics and morals that you hold as part of the guidelines for running it.
One which takes a concern about the people, whether they are the clients or whether they are the employees or whether they are actually the investors as well. That actually it's about relationship, and I believe that that's what easily gets lost in the business practices of our culture today, which is simply about the profit motive. But the most important thing, more important than profit, is actually the relationships between people, the transactions between people, the giving and receiving between people.
Well, from what I've been hearing, it's having a business that will benefit others in the way of Christ, but people are not looking to help people, they're looking to help their business, and they make their business run, and they use whoever they can whenever they can. And so I think that's quite wrong. I think we're making people like animals instead of humans, and we need to look at that part of life.
I think the thing that really interested me and excited me from the examples that were given today was the Clean for Good business, where they were talking about disrupting the way in which the cleaning industry works because of a lack of concern within that industry for the people who work within it. And their business model is seeking to demonstrate that it is possible to make a profit and care for the people who work within your company in a way that simply doesn't happen within that industry at the moment. So that was very exciting and interesting for me to hear.
Ethical business models that are ones that help society can be found all over. There are small individual people just doing the best they can. There are partnerships, and then there are larger social enterprise or businesses that are run for profit, that are just making sure that the ethics and morals that the trustees and board of directors hold
are things that are embedded in the company as a whole?
I think there's great growth in smaller ethical businesses, be it coffee shops, barbers, bakers, a lot of the startups that you see, but also we see the problem of businesses being corrupted. We see that with the very large businesses that have taken over public sector contracts, for example, 0 hours contracts as well. So maybe it's easier when you're smaller, and maybe what we need to find is a model for larger businesses.
Particularly the Clean for Good, I thought, was really interesting in that it was trying to, and what it's doing, it's achieving a relationship between, establishing a relationship between themselves, the business, the cleaners who are getting a living wage, but also the companies which are using their services, and recognizing that actually cleaners are people, and that building a relationship with people is with your, whether it's with your cleaner or your employer or with your the customer, is just really, really important.
By having things like this, having seminars, going to churches, inviting other people to see, you know, I think this has been a very good day. I was very pleased to come and hear what people are doing, and think, so we need more of that.
Well, one action I'm certainly going to do is look at my grateful, and the next time we have a staff lunch, and we're going to have some very good food, I hope. So, and actually we need to be recommending one another. We need to be aware of one another. We need to be networking and recommending. And yeah, making sure we know our cleaner. That's a good point. I know my cleaners, but I'm in a small setup.
Promoting ethical business models outside of the church is tricky. You need to do it by making money. Because if you make money and show that profit can be made while still being an ethical business, then people are willing to do. The London Living Wage discovered that they were able to prove that paying your cleaners more meant you had less staff turnover, you had less staff illness, and that you maintained a higher quality of cleaner.
I think the key challenge that was articulated was how you balance out the importance of making a profit, whether that's a profit that goes to shareholders or a profit that's reinvested in the business and the community, and how you balance that with care for people, both the people that work for you, your suppliers and your customers as well, and thinking through how to balance those things out ethically and effectively was, I think, the key challenge that was thrown out today.
We've had a really good seminar here today looking at the issue of ethical business, and it was great to bring a whole range of people together, people who are actually leading ethical businesses themselves, as well as people who are keen to learn, church leaders keen to learn what does it mean to do ethical business. And I think the things I really learned today from the discussion we had was that ethical business is really a part of our mission. It's about what we do as churches cooperating with God to bring about a fairer world. It relates to our values, particularly values around justice and around dignity. It relates to our practices, not least the way we treat people, the kind of relationships we have. There was a really strong narrative today about not just seeing people in terms of the transactions, financial transactions that happen in relationships between people, but about actually looking at the value of people's lives, how they're impacted by the transactions, financial transactions that take place. What are the social transactions that are important as part of an ethical business? And it was great in particular, I think, to hear from Clean for Good. You know, there's a business that what they're doing is they're encouraging companies to ask the question, when you've got a cleaning contract, how are you making those cleaners visible? How are you seeing the people who are doing the work that you benefit from when you come to a clean office in the morning? And I thought it was really good that they're going around and they're encouraging businesses to ask that question, and they're providing a cleaning service, which is for people, it's for people who are fully on the London Living Wage, and it's for people who are on full-time rather than on 0-hour contracts. So that was great.
What I think about ethical business in the churches is that churches can have a key role in promoting ethical businesses, just as we promote other events and charities. Let's not be shy to promote things which are about making a profit, but also actually about the people who are involved in the profits that are made. So I think we should be promoting businesses, and I think actually we should be agitating as well, like a lot of churches are doing in relation to promoting Clean for Good, agitating by going around and saying, you know, what are the arrangements for your cleaning? Is what you're doing ethical? You know, are you actually making sure that you're seeing the workers that are cleaning your property? So it was a great day, lots of learning, lots of things that we'll take away, some challenges as well that we'll rise to in terms of thinking about how we can promote training opportunities. But all in all, a great day, a great learning, and something that we'll use to resource churches across London on promoting ethical business. It was so good today to have the food at the end of the day provided by My Grateful. What a wonderful organisation that is. That's a social enterprise that's bringing together migrants, bringing together also volunteer refugees who are unable to work, and giving value to people, and then also giving an income to those people who are able to receive income, and doing it in a way that's actually opening people's eyes to the contribution that migrants are making to our country. Wonderful model of an ethical business, and it was great to see the people who actually provide the food that we were eating today.